The Arizona sun was merciless that morning, turning the tarmac into a mirror of blinding light. Heat shimmered above the endless stretch of concrete at Davis Air Force Base, where thousands of spectators crowded behind metal barriers. Children clutched paper flags, teenagers craned for photos, and veterans adjusted caps embroidered with faded unit patches. Overhead, fighter jets carved white scars into the sky, their thunder rolling across the desert like distant drums of war. Through that restless crowd, a small woman moved slowly but deliberately. Eleanor Hayes, 73 years old, pressed one hand to the satchel slung across her shoulder. The leather was cracked, faded to the color of desert dust, and inside it rested notebooks that had followed her for 4 decades. Her knees ached with every step, but she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had weathered storms far fiercer than heat or distance. The crowd buzzed with excitement. Eleanor barely heard it. She had driven 4 hours that morning in her battered sedan, leaving her tiny Phoenix apartment before dawn. Her purpose was not the aerial acrobatics, nor the spectacle that thrilled the masses. She had come for one reason, and one reason only: to see the aircraft that had defined her life. The ungainly beast most people overlooked, even laughed at. The A-10 Thunderbolt II. The Warthog. Her heart tightened when she caught sight of its silhouette parked across the runway. Squat. Mean. Ugly in a way only those who knew its strength could appreciate. To Eleanor, it was beautiful. It was family. She was just lifting her camera when a sharp voice sliced through the noise. "Excuse me, ma'am." Eleanor turned. A man in his 40s stood blocking her way, arms crossed, a neon vest stretched tight over his chest. His name tag gleamed: Bradley Chun, Operations Manager. His expression was not welcoming. "This area is restricted. VIP viewing only," he said. His tone was clipped, dismissive, the kind reserved for someone who clearly didn't belong. He pointed toward the yellow barriers where the general public swarmed shoulder to shoulder. "You'll need to stay back there with everyone else." Eleanor followed his gesture. From that distance, she would see little more than distant specks of aircraft. No details. No maintenance procedures. Nothing of what she had come for. "I understand," she replied softly, "but I was hoping to watch the A-10 maintenance demonstration up close. You see, I have some experience with—" Bradley cut her off with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm sure you're very enthusiastic about airplanes. But this space is for professionals and special guests. We can't have civilians wandering around asking questions." The word stung more than she let on. Civilians. Enthusiastic. As though her presence was little more than an inconvenience. Another staff member approached, a younger man, clipboard in hand, chewing gum. He glanced at Eleanor with a smirk. "Everything okay here, Brad?" "Just explaining that this lady needs to move along," Bradley said, loud enough for Eleanor to hear. "Probably someone's grandmother who got lost. You know how these old-timers get confused." The younger man chuckled, not even bothering to lower his voice. Eleanor's cheeks warmed, though whether from anger or humiliation, she couldn't say. She straightened her cardigan and replied firmly, "I'm not lost. And I'm not confused. I simply wanted to observe the demonstration." The young man grinned. "Ma'am, that's pretty technical stuff. Maybe you'd enjoy the flying show instead. They're doing a heritage flight later. Lots of noise, smoke, great fun. I'd hurry to the barriers, though. It's quite a walk, especially at your age." At your age. The words echoed, sharp as a knife. Eleanor's grip tightened on the satchel. Inside were the manuals she had written, diagrams, notes, procedures that had kept the A-10 alive in battle when nothing else could. Procedures that had been copied, studied, taught for generations. She could have told these men things they couldn't even imagine. But to them, she was invisible. Just another old woman in a cotton dress and scuffed shoes. Her voice was steady as she said, "I'll find my way." And with quiet dignity, she turned from their dismissive laughter. As she moved toward the general viewing area, she heard the younger one whisper, "Probably watched Top Gun once and thinks she's an expert." Their laughter trailed after her like smoke. The crowd at the barriers was a crush of bodies, hot and suffocating. Eleanor wedged herself into a narrow gap between a family juggling strollers and a knot of teenagers glued to their phones. No one acknowledged her murmured, "Excuse me." No one cared that she could barely see over their shoulders. From here, the maintenance crews looked like distant ants. Still, she pulled one of her notebooks from the satchel. The paper had yellowed with age, but the pencil lines remained sharp, every technical sketch precise. Her finger traced a familiar diagram. Her diagram. The one that had saved entire squadrons in desert wars long forgotten by the crowd around her. A voice at her elbow startled her. "That's some detailed stuff. You an engineer?" Eleanor looked up. A young woman stood there, maybe mid-20s, hair tied back, grease still smudged beneath her nails. Her eyes were bright, curious, not mocking. "I was a crew chief," Eleanor answered. Her chest lifted a little as she added, "Specialized in battle damage repair." The young woman's eyes widened. "No kidding. That's incredible. When did you serve?" 1973 to 1995. Eleanor's voice softened. "I was one of the first women assigned to A-10 maintenance. Back when she was brand new." The young woman let out a low whistle. "Wow." She leaned closer, about to ask another question. But before she could, the announcer's voice thundered through the loudspeakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Lieutenant Colonel Amelia Morrison in the A-10 Thunderbolt II." Eleanor froze. The name struck her like lightning. Amelia, her granddaughter. The granddaughter she hadn't spoken to in months. The granddaughter who had inherited her stubborn streak, her fire. The granddaughter who was now piloting the very aircraft Eleanor had dedicated her life to. The young woman beside her cheered as the A-10 appeared on the horizon, its engines screaming a sound that rattled bones. The crowd roared in delight, but Eleanor barely heard them. Her heart was pounding too loudly. She hadn't even known Amelia would be here. And now, as the warthog roared overhead, Eleanor's secret, the truth she had carried quietly for decades, was closer than ever to being revealed. The crowd erupted as the A-10 Thunderbolt II streaked across the sky, its engines howling with a sound unlike any other. To the casual ear, it was noise. To Eleanor Hayes, it was music. That grinding, thunderous whine had once meant salvation to soldiers pinned down on the battlefield. To her, it was also the sound of nights spent under floodlights with grease-stained hands, patching holes the size of dinner plates, so these beasts could keep flying. Her chest swelled as she tilted her head back, watching the aircraft carve a slow, deliberate roll against the cloudless blue. Amelia Morrison, her granddaughter, the one she had helped raise. The one she hadn't spoken to in nearly 6 months, after a stupid argument that had stretched far too long. "She flies clean," Eleanor whispered, almost to herself. Her voice trembled with pride she had no intention of showing to the men who had dismissed her earlier. The young mechanic standing beside her, the one with grease still under her nails, leaned against the railing. Phone raised. "She's one of the best. Look at that control. That's precision you don't fake." Eleanor's lips curved. "She gets that from her mother," she murmured. But her eyes glistened. Deep down, she knew Amelia had inherited more than skill. She'd inherited Eleanor's stubbornness, her refusal to back down, her love for this ungainly bird that had been mocked by so many. The announcer's booming voice echoed across the base. "Ladies and gentlemen, watch closely as Lieutenant Colonel Morrison demonstrates the close-air support maneuvers that have made the A-10 legendary for 50 years. The crowd gasped as the jet dove low, pulling up sharply just above the runway. Dust spiraled in its wake. The sound rolled through Eleanor's bones, tugging her back to another time. She was young again, in coveralls too big for her frame, hair pinned back under a grease-stained cap. The desert smelled of oil and sweat. Her hands worked feverishly over torn metal, patching, testing, tightening bolts, while mortars thudded in the distance. Every second mattered. Every repair could mean the difference between life and death. A ripple of laughter nearby pulled her back to the present. Not cruel this time, curious. An older man in a Desert Storm veteran's cap had overheard her quiet comment. "You recognize her flying?" he asked. His voice carried the slow rasp of someone who had seen too much sand, too much war. Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. I should. She's my granddaughter. The man's eyes widened. His gaze flicked from Eleanor's weathered face to the A-10 circling above. Then his expression shifted to something softer. Respect. You don't say. He tipped the brim of his cap. Hell of a pilot. But if she's your granddaughter, then you must be. Before he could finish, the young mechanic butted in, still filming. Wait. Your granddaughter is Amelia Morrison? And you were a crew chief? On A-10s. Her tone was incredulous, but not mocking. Hungry almost. Hungry for confirmation of something she couldn't quite believe. Eleanor opened her mouth, but stopped. For decades, she had lived quietly, her notebooks gathering dust in that satchel. She had let the work speak for itself, while others took the credit or forgot the name attached. Did it matter now if they knew? The veteran answered for her. You're Eleanor Hayes, aren't you? His voice was steady, but his eyes shone with recognition. The Hayes procedures. Damn near saved my aircraft more than once in the Gulf. Lady, every crew chief I ever met knew your name. The words struck her like a hammer and a bomb all at once. For years, she had wondered if her work had simply vanished into manuals and training slides. To hear it spoken aloud, reverently, was almost too much. The young mechanic's jaw dropped. Wait, you wrote those procedures? The Hayes procedures? My instructor said whoever invented them deserved a statue. Eleanor lowered her gaze to the notebook in her hands, its pages worn soft from decades of use. She traced one sketch with her finger, her lips trembling. I just did my job, she whispered. But the whisper was swallowed by the crowd. Others had overheard now. Veterans nearby shifted closer. Their voices carried stories like sparks catching fire. My crew patched hydraulics in Kandahar with those methods. Kept us flying in Iraq when nothing else worked. Saved my wingman's life after his bird took a direct hit. The murmurs grew, spreading outward through the crowd, until strangers began pointing, whispering her name as though it were legend. Eleanor Hayes, the woman behind the procedures, the ghost behind the manual. Eleanor's chest tightened. She hadn't asked for this. She had come to watch quietly, to remember, to honor the machine she had dedicated her life to. But now eyes were turning, voices rising, recognition spreading like wildfire. And above them all, Amelia's A-10 bankard, engines shrieking, sunlight glinting off steel wings. The granddaughter carried the torch, but the crowd was beginning to realize where the flame had first been lit. Eleanor's hands trembled on the notebook. Her throat ached. For so long, she had been invisible, forgotten. Now, suddenly, people were looking at her as though she had stepped out of myth. The young mechanic's voice broke through the din, soft but fierce. You're not just someone's grandmother. You're the reason this aircraft still flies. Eleanor turned to her, eyes stinging with tears she hadn't planned to shed. For the first time in years, she felt seen. But then, a new voice boomed over the loudspeakers. Sharp, irritated. Bradley Chun. All right, people, let's keep it moving. We're here to showcase modern maintenance excellence, not the outdated methods from the Stone Age. His chuckle crackled across the PA, back when women thought they could turn wrenches. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some muttered. Others frowned. The young mechanic at Eleanor's side bristled. What a jerk. He has no idea who you are. The veteran clenched his fists, his jaw hard. Oh, he's about to find out. And in that instant, standing beneath the roar of her granddaughter's aircraft, surrounded by murmurs of recognition and the sting of public dismissal, Eleanor Hayes realized something. Her story was no longer hers alone. It was becoming part of the legacy of the sky. The roar of the A-10 Thunderbolt too shook the ground as it thundered past, low and fierce, rattling windows and hearts alike. Children squealed in delight. Veterans stood a little taller, and every camera phone in sight pointed toward the sky. Eleanor Hayes, her weathered fingers curled around the railing, didn't blink. She couldn't. Not when the pilot carving those precise, disciplined turns above was her granddaughter, Amelia Morrison, the child she had once rocked to sleep with lullabies that hummed of propellers and flight. The pride swelling in her chest was tempered by a knot of sorrow. They hadn't spoken in half a year, not since that bitter quarrel about Eleanor's stubborn refusal to move in with family. Amelia had called it reckless. Eleanor had called it independence. Pride had done the rest. Now, the distance between them felt heavier than the desert heat. Beside her, the young mechanic, Martinez, was still whispering in awe. If it's true, if you really wrote the Hayes procedures, then this whole crowd owes you. Every maintainer does. Eleanor only managed a thin smile. She wasn't here for accolades. She just wanted one last look. One last reminder of the machine that had been her life's work. But the whispers around her were growing. More and more faces turned her way. Veterans stepped closer, their eyes wide with dawning recognition. One even pressed a challenge coin into her palm, his voice breaking. "Ma'am, you saved my aircraft in Desert Storm. Without your procedures, I wouldn't be here." Eleanor's throat tightened. She opened her mouth to respond. Then a new sound crackled in the distance. Not from the jet, from the base loudspeakers. "Security," Bradley Chen's clipped voice echoed. "We have a disturbance in Section C. Probably another drunk veteran. Handle it quickly." The crowd shifted uneasily. Eyes darted between Eleanor and the uniformed guards approaching from the side. Murmurs rose. The word disturbance carried sharp edges. "Disturbance," the veteran in the cap spat. "The only disturbance here is Chen running his mouth." Martinez bristled. "They're coming for you." Eleanor's stomach knotted, but she stood tall. She wouldn't run. Not after everything. High above, Amelia's voice cut through the radio static in the control tower. She was lining up for the next maneuver when the air traffic controller's calm voice faltered. "Viper 2-3, be advised we've got an unusual situation on the ground." "Say again, tower?" Amelia replied, pulling her A-10 into a tight banking turn. Pause. Then the words came, measured but edged with disbelief. "Your grandmother, Eleanor Hayes, is in Section C. Veterans are gathering around her. Word is spreading. Operations Manager Chen called security on her earlier, unaware of who she was. Crowds not happy." Amelia's grip on the stick went rigid. Her heartbeat slammed in her ears. Grandma. Here. The woman who had raised her. The woman who had taught her, as a child with a toy wrench, that precision and patience mattered more than strength. The woman whose procedures still kept Amelia's own aircraft alive. And Chun had humiliated her. The tower's voice buzzed again. "Viper 2-3, hold formation. Repeat, hold formation. You are not cleared for deviation." But Amelia's jaw had already set like iron. "Negative, tower," she said, her voice steady as stone. "This is Lieutenant Colonel Amelia Morrison. I'm performing an honor pass for Chief Master Sergeant Eleanor Hayes. United States Air Force, retired. The woman who wrote the book, literally, that keeps these birds in the air." The controller sputtered. "Viper 2-3, that's not in the..." But Amelia had already broken formation. With a thunderous roar, the A-10 peeled away from its demo pattern, banking sharply toward the crowd. Gasps erupted from the stands. The announcer's voice cracked over the loudspeakers, alarmed. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not part of the planned demonstration." Eleanor's eyes went wide as the Warthog descended lower, closer, slicing across the sky directly over Section C. The engine screamed, rattling every rib, every window, every heart. Then, over the base-wide PA system, Amelia's voice rang clear. "This is Lieutenant Colonel Amelia Morrison. I am proud to fly the A-10 Thunderbolt today, but prouder still to be the granddaughter of Eleanor Hayes. My grandmother. The woman who pioneered the maintenance procedures that brought thousands of pilots home safely. The procedures we still use to this day." The crowd went silent, then exploded in cheers so loud they drowned even the engines. Bradley Chen's pale face flickered across the Jumbotron, frozen as the weight of Amelia's words washed over 20,000 people. His insult, his dismissal, now laid bare for all to see. Above, Amelia dipped her wings left, then right, then leveled. The solemn, sacred motion of the missing man salute. a tribute usually reserved for the fallen, performed instead for a living legend standing anonymously among the crowd. Tears blurred Eleanor's vision. Around her, veterans snapped to attention, saluting as one. Martinez wiped her eyes with the back of her grease-stained hand, phone still filming every second. "Do you see this?" she whispered hoarsely. "She's saluting you." Eleanor's breath caught. Her knees nearly buckled. For decades, she had been overlooked, underestimated, dismissed. And now the sky itself seemed to bow in recognition. Security guards, who only minutes ago had been approaching to escort her out, froze in place. The commander of the base himself, 2 stars gleaming on his shoulders, strode quickly toward Section C. His face was grim, but his eyes softened when they found Eleanor. "Chief Master Sergeant Hayes," he said formally, offering his arm. "Ma'am, forgive me. You don't belong behind barriers. You belong at the front." The crowd roared in agreement. The general turned, his voice sharp now. "Operations Manager Chun." Bradley stumbled forward, stammering, "General, I had no idea who she was. She didn't identify herself, The general cut him off cold. "She shouldn't have had to. Every veteran, every citizen here deserves respect. The fact you dismissed her based on age and gender tells me everything. Clear your desk. You're finished here." A hush fell. Then the crowd erupted in applause, deafening, cleansing. Bradley's face drained of color as he was led away. And Eleanor Hayes, who had started the day invisible, was escorted through the barriers she'd been barred from, into the heart of the VIP section. As she stepped forward, Martinez's trembling voice reached her. "Ma'am, they're about to demonstrate your procedures. Will you show us?" "Supervise." Eleanor's lips parted, her heart heavy with disbelief and joy all at once. The world had turned upside down in the span of minutes. Above, Amelia circled once more, her voice soft over the PA. "I'm sorry, Grandma. Sorry I stayed away. Sorry you had to stand with the crowd when you deserve a parade." Eleanor lifted her face to the sky, tears streaming freely now. She had never needed a parade. But this honor pass, this roar of engines, this sea of salutes, was more than enough. And deep inside, she knew, the world was finally remembering who she was. The world around Eleanor Hayes blurred. Applause thundered from 20,000 throats. Veterans saluted. Mechanics, young and old, leaned forward with awe. Cameras hovered like eyes of history, recording every second. She had spent her life in the shadows of hangars, under the guttural rumble of engines, in grease-stained coveralls. Now she was being ushered through the crowd by a 2-star general himself. Every step felt unreal, as if she had stepped into a dream she didn't dare believe. "Chief Hayes," the general said, guiding her toward the front row. His tone was formal, but his eyes betrayed reverence. "We owe you an apology, and more than that, a proper place of honor." Eleanor clutched her satchel tighter, her voice quiet but firm. "I never needed honor, just respect." The general nodded gravely. "You'll have it now." As they reached the VIP section, the announcer's trembling voice filled the loudspeakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, it seems we have among us a true legend. The procedures used to keep the A-10 alive in combat for 5 decades were written by none other than Chief Master Sergeant Eleanor Hayes, who stands with us here today." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Then silence. Then applause so fierce it rattled the bleachers. Eleanor stood frozen, her knees weak, until a voice called out from the field. "Chief Hayes." She turned. A line of maintainers, young men and women in crisp coveralls, stood at attention by the very aircraft she had come to see. One of them, voice breaking, shouted, "We're using your procedures for today's demonstration. Would you supervise us?" Eleanor's lips parted. Her heart ached. For decades, those very words, her words, had lived only in manuals. Now the flesh and blood heirs to her work were calling her forward. Her throat tightened, but she managed to smile. "I'd be honored." Within minutes, someone had fetched her a pair of coveralls. She slipped into them with trembling hands, the fabric smelling faintly of oil and fresh starch. When she stepped onto the tarmac, The roar of the crowd dulled. For a moment, it was just her and the machine. The A-10 stood before her, scarred and sturdy, as if waiting for her touch. Eleanor placed her palm gently against its metal skin. "Hello, old friend," she whispered. The demonstration began. Crews swarmed the aircraft, simulating battle damage. Eleanor moved among them, steady despite her years, explaining each step in that calm, precise voice she had used for decades. "See this angle? 30 degrees, exactly. Steeper, and the patch won't hold under pressure. Shallower, and the metal will fatigue." We learned that the hard way, after losing 2 aircraft in training. Never lost another to patch failure after that. The young mechanics listened with rapt attention. Martinez stood nearest, notebook in hand, scribbling furiously. Her wide eyes followed Eleanor's every movement. For Eleanor, time folded in on itself. She was 25 again, shouting over the whine of engines, her hands raw from endless work, her mind burning with innovation. She had lived this once. Now she was living it again, passing it on. When the demonstration ended, applause erupted once more. But this time, the noise was different. Not the casual cheer for spectacle. It was respect, gratitude, awe. Veterans stepped forward. One, his left leg replaced by a prosthetic, clasped Eleanor's hand with trembling fingers. "Your procedures brought my A-10 back after a missile strike. Because of you, I came home to meet my son." Another, eyes wet, said, "In Afghanistan, we were pinned down. The bird was Swiss cheese. My crew patched her with your methods, MRE containers, and 100-mile tape. We lived because of you." Each story was a weight and a gift. Eleanor's chest ached with the enormity of it. All those sleepless nights, all that grease under her nails, all the battles against doubt and prejudice. It had not been for nothing. The announcer's voice cut in, softer now. "Chief Hayes, would you be willing to say a few words?" For a heartbeat, Eleanor froze. She had spent her life silent, letting others speak, letting the work be her voice. Public speaking had never been her way. But something inside her stirred, a fire she hadn't felt in years. She stepped to the microphone. The crowd fell utterly silent. "When I first put on these coveralls in 1973, she began, her voice surprisingly strong, "I was told women didn't belong in aircraft maintenance, that our hands were too weak, our minds too scattered, our emotions too fragile." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, uncomfortable, knowing. For 22 years, I let my work do the talking. I developed procedures that could patch an A-10 with hydraulics shot out, that could keep her flying after a 30-millimeter hit. I trained maintainers who trained the next generation. I did it not to prove anyone wrong, but because every aircraft that failed meant someone didn't come home. Her voice wavered, then steadied. Today, I was told again that I didn't belong. Because I am old. Because I am a woman. Because I don't look like someone who understands combat aviation. She paused. The silence was heavy, electric. And, in a way, they were right. I don't understand modern combat aviation. The technology has passed me by. But I do understand something more important. That every person, regardless of age, gender, or appearance, has something to contribute. That dismissing someone because they don't fit your picture of who belongs means losing knowledge you may desperately need. Her gaze swept the sea of faces, young and old, veteran and civilian alike. To every young woman here who has been told she doesn't belong in a hangar or a cockpit or a command post, remember this. Your work will outlive prejudice. Your excellence will outlast doubt. Don't waste time fighting for permission to belong. Just do the work. Excellence is its own argument. The first clap came from Martinez, sharp and defiant. Then another. Then the applause swelled, wave after wave, until the entire base seemed to tremble with it. Eleanor stepped back, chest heaving, eyes shimmering. For decades she had been silent. Now her voice carried on the wind, stronger than the engines that roared above. And somewhere in the sky, Amelia's A-10 circled back, dipping her wings again in salute. Eleanor Hayes, the forgotten woman, was forgotten no more. That night, long after the sun bled into the desert horizon and the crowds had gone home, Eleanor Hayes sat at her small kitchen table. The same table where Amelia had once done math homework with pencils and erasers, while Eleanor explained lift and drag using folded paper airplanes. Steam curled from bowls of chicken soup, her mother's recipe passed down like a family heirloom. Across from her, Amelia still wore her flight suit, her cheeks flushed from the day's adrenaline. She stirred her soup distractedly, phone buzzing every few seconds with notifications. "Grandma," Amelia said at last, eyes wide, "you're viral. There's a video of your speech with 8 million views already." 8 million. The Secretary of the Air Force tweeted about you. Congress wants you to testify. Eleanor nearly dropped her spoon. Congress? Good heavens, child, I don't know anything about politics. You know about being dismissed, Amelia said firmly. You know about being told you don't belong and proving them all wrong through your work. That's what they need to hear. Eleanor chuckled softly, shaking her head. I spent my life teaching patches and hydraulics. Now they want me to patch society. Her smile faded. But maybe that's the real work I was meant to do. 3 weeks later, Eleanor sat before a congressional subcommittee, her uniform pressed, her silver hair pinned neatly back. Her old satchel rested at her feet, stuffed with yellowing notebooks and decades of evidence. When I wrote what became the Hayes Procedures, she told the room, her voice calm, I wasn't trying to make history. I was trying to keep pilots alive. But because I was a woman, the adoption of those procedures was delayed 18 months. In that time, 12 aircraft were lost. That is the cost of prejudice. Not hurt feelings, lives. Gasps echoed. Pens scratched. Cameras clicked. Headlines exploded the next morning. Forgotten hero confronts Congress. The woman who kept the warthog alive. Within 6 months, the Air Force launched the Hayes Initiative, a sweeping program to root out bias in technical fields. Eleanor became its first director, working with young maintainers like Martinez to ensure no one would be dismissed because of gender, age, or appearance again. One afternoon, months later, Eleanor was back at Davis Air Force Base, leading a workshop. Martinez hovered at her side, eager as ever, while rows of young airmen scribbled notes. During a break, a familiar figure approached, civilian clothes, posture stiff. Bradley Chun. Eleanor raised her brow, saying nothing. Chief Hayes, he began quietly, I owe you an apology. Not just for that day, but for years of thinking like I did. I've been re-evaluating, learning. I asked to attend this workshop because I want to do better. If you'll have me. Eleanor studied him. Pride still lingered in his stance, but it was tempered now by something new. Humility. Finally, she nodded. Everyone deserves a chance to grow. Welcome to the workshop, Mr. Chun. And just like that, the cycle of dismissal and redemption shifted, one person at a time. Eleanor's life changed in ways she never expected. She spoke at academies and bases, consulted on next-generation aircraft, and mentored young women who saw in her proof that they, too, belonged. But her favorite moments weren't the speeches or the ceremonies. They were the quiet ones, like when Martinez burst into her kitchen one evening, grease on her face, notebook in hand, desperate for advice. Or when Amelia dropped by in uniform, sitting with her grandmother over tea, talking not just about flying, but about family, regret, and pride. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt not invisible, but alive. One evening, after another long day of workshops, she sat on the porch with Amelia. The desert stretched before them, silent except for the whisper of wind. In the distance, an A-10 lifted into the orange sky, its engine singing that familiar, guttural tune. Amelia leaned forward, elbows on her knees. Grandma, you've spent your whole life keeping these birds alive. And now you're doing the same for people, helping them believe they belong. Eleanor smiled softly, eyes on the horizon. Funny thing, isn't it? The warthog wasn't built to be pretty. It was built to endure, to take a beating and keep flying. Turns out, she chuckled quietly. So was I. Months later, at an air show half a country away, Eleanor walked onto the field in coveralls once again. This time, she wasn't stopped at the barriers. She was invited to lead. Young maintainers swarmed her, eager for her wisdom. Veterans saluted her as they passed. And everywhere, she saw something she hadn't seen before. Girls in the crowd, watching her with wide, hopeful eyes. The A-10 overhead roared in salute, and Eleanor thought of all the times she'd been told she didn't belong. Sometimes she realized the best revenge is not proving them wrong once. It's being so essential that 50 years later, they're still using your work. She closed her eyes, listening to the engines fade into the sky. For the first time in decades, she felt light. Not forgotten, not dismissed, but legendary. Eleanor Hayes' story wasn't about aircraft alone. It was about endurance, about standing tall when the world tried to push you down, about legacy, not the kind etched into monuments, but the kind carried in every pilot who came home safe, every maintainer who patched metal under fire, every young woman who now believed she could belong. She had been invisible. Now she was a beacon. And as the warthog's roar echoed into the distance, Eleanor whispered to herself, "Second act, here we go."